I encourage you to go to the Volkswagen webpage and submit comments. You can also upload documents. I know we've received I've had several requests to post some documents on the web, so we will work on posting comments that we've received to the web as well. Where do we go from here? I think we feel like we're coming to a consensus on some things. Granted, there are still some outstanding. So what the department is planning on doing after this meeting and taking the discussion from today and comments from the web is to kind of compile them ourselves and then kind of have a sit-down internal discussion. Okay, where are we with all the comments? And then brief our management on where we are with all the comments, and then see where to go from there. So that's a little vague, I know, but we have placed on the agenda that tentatively we have this room reserved in mid-February and also in March. I noticed we removed the date since we changed the date on you last time, and I apologize for that. That was my executive decision at the last minute. I didn't think we were quite ready for the meeting last Tuesday. So we'll let you know as soon as possible through the website when the next meeting is. I anticipate we'll have at least one meeting, and maybe that meeting is to show you what we have come up with on the draft plan to take your comment before we go on official public notice. Again, we're still kind of figuring that out. So with that, I'll open up for discussion, question, comments, anything that we haven't heard from, or if you want to tell us what you think the consensus is from the information we presented at this meeting and the last meeting, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts as well. Paul?
Yeah, I'd just like to take a minute here and give some praise where praise is due. I know along the way here I've probably given more than my fair share of input, so thanks for allowing me to do that. But in my job with Cummins, we have regular meetings with other Midwest area managers who are just trying to keep their finger on the pulse of how this is progressing through different states. And I was in one of those meetings this morning, and other area managers kind of, well, what about your state? And a lot of states are not nearly as far along as you guys have carried the ball down the field here. Some when it's their turn they say, well, not much going on. But you guys have, like I said, really moved the ball down the field well here, I believe. And I just think you've done an excellent job of weighing the public input on one hand and overlaying that with some metrics and underscoring the goals as far as what we need to accomplish and where we're going with this. Yeah, great graphs and presentation. So in this hour we live where people are really sensitive as far as how well their governments perform with their taxpayer dollars, I just want to say I think you guys are doing a great job. So
I appreciate that. I will say it goes to the Volkswagen team. I just show up for the meetings, but and I really appreciate that that's all I have to do. I do show up for the pre-meetings too, so I get a preview of the slides, but they've done remarkable. So I echo that, and I appreciate that. I saw another hand. I guess not.
Question online from Catherine Werner. With my hearing disability, I was only really able to get what was depicted on the slides. I didn't really see any reference to solar-powered electricity for EV charging stations. Was that covered?
Hopefully you can hear me, Catherine. We didn't actually get into solar-powered EV charging stations. However, if the goal is light-duty EV charging infrastructure, to the degree it could be solar-powered, it would be eligible. And so if that were proposed in an application, I suppose it would be considered. We didn't ask what the details of how the EV infrastructure should be picked. I think I'll point out that, out of all the different categories, that one had the biggest support for developing a team to actually create the project as opposed to strictly scoring applications. So to the degree that a team could, decide that maybe we want to test out some solar charging stations, that would be certainly an option. And as far as if the fleet itself is converting an existing vehicle from diesel to electric, then the charging infrastructure is also included as an eligible cost. And so if that fleet itself decided that solar powered was the way they wanted to go, they could put that into their application. Catherine, I hope you were able to hear that.
I would state, again, I summarize that in case people on the phone weren't able to hear Mark, that we did not get that specific on the EV charging stations. However, one item I would note here is that all of the meetings that we've live streamed, we're videotaping, and that videotape and the conversation is going to be available online on the website. So if you missed parts of this meeting, or if you're on the phone and didn't hear parts of it, for those that talked into the microphone, we should have a pretty good recording of it, and it usually is posted a day or so after the meeting. Van is our wonderful technician, and he gets that posted pretty quickly. So you can go to the Volkswagen webpage and watch the video. So.
I had a follow-up comment about the EV charging, and just wanted to advocate that the full 15% be spent on that. The primary rationale for that is that unlike all the other measures that we're looking at, where it's one for one, you're going to fund an owner to have this equipment, whether it's government or private or school district. If we deploy this charging and you could put a requirement that this is for public space, you're enabling multiple vehicles to use that infrastructure. So you're not buying a vehicle for someone, you're just enabling the technology to be utilized. And so there's multiple effects from that. So it would be money well spent to spend the $6 million on the infrastructure. And also, I think a team approach to that would be really wise, to coordinate it and make sure you don't end up with clustering, with a priority on the highway charging and secondarily on the local charging.
And I would just like to back up what you just stated with also that the team approach and spreading the charging stations around the state allowed the benefit to accrue to the entire state.
Jay Hoskins, MSD. I'll just, this is my first one of these meetings, so I'm quickly trying to get up to speed on things, but a couple things that I heard that hit home for me. Darcy mentioned the phased approach at the application process, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's something that's served the department well in other programs as well, and so that's something that I would encourage them to continue to look into. I do think that your approach, some of the feedback you've already gotten about matrix and having some kind of a scoring matrix to individual projects that considers a whole host of things, including location, matrix, emissions reduction, who is sensitive receptors, kids, obviously. I mean, all of that makes sense, but I think having that within the package, the application package, so that it's really clear to folks how that's all going to be scored and be transparent. I'm sure you will anyway, but that's something I think just can't be understated enough, that for applicants, we really want to understand exactly what the factors are that are being considered, and I hope that's something that we would have an opportunity to comment on before the plan becomes final, because I think that's going to allow us to give you the best feedback possible as far as what we see as potential, program utilization, which that kind of leads me to my last question. I'll get off my soapbox now, but my question for you all is, based on the feedback you've gotten, I mean, how confident are you that you're going to get enough applications into the program that you're going to be able to utilize all of the money? It seems like there's a good bit of emphasis and interest from school districts, and that's fantastic. But just kind of curious, outside of that, I mean, in the charging stations, where do you think you are with utilizing the program?
Well, Jay, I'll take a crack at it. So I think, putting up the, the estimate of the inventories we had was one thing. We occasionally get interest from, different types of fleet operators. We know that there's trucking companies that operate within the state. We know that there's, how many hundred cities and counties that own trucks that would be interested in this money. But I think the phased approach is what I'm going to really hammer home, is that if it turns out that we're not getting applications for a certain project category, we can roll that money into a category we're getting too many applications. And so I think in the end, it shouldn't be a problem to spend all 41 million, but it may be that we have to adjust those percentages midway through. Does that answer it?
No, that makes sense. I mean, my comment, just in looking around the room, is I don't see many of my colleagues. I think I heard Catherine Warner and one person from the airport here. I mean, St. Louis is, just speaking for St. Louis, and with 91 municipalities, and plus it's a difficult place to get the information out to. So I can certainly understand that there could be some challenges in making sure that happens too.
David, I know you have a question. I would respond to that too, Jay, in that in our meetings that we went around to the different locations, we did have quite a good representation at Kansas City, St. Louis, and Springfield that we're not seen here in Jeff City. So I know that we have that interest, and I know those are individuals on the listserv. We would, if a category is picked, we would do our best to do outreach and have you all help us do outreach to make sure we do get plenty of applicants. But as Mark said, the phased approach really helps us with that. I would comment, the reason we've done school buses with DERA is we always get applicants for school buses in DERA, which wasn't the case in some of the other projects. But there's a lot more money here, so I think we'll get that interest. But if not, if we pick a category to spend a certain percentage of the funds and we don't get applicants, then that money will just go on to another category. So,
And I think that makes sense.
yeah. David, you had your hand up a while ago.
Things. Number
Yes.
one, if you got trouble having applicants, give me a call.
We'll do that. We will do that.
Second, getting kind of in the weeds here. You guys know me, I deal in rural areas, and we've got folks that range from pretty sophisticated to, put it delicately, not so sophisticated. Are you going to have any trouble with on behalf of applications, where somebody like the Regional Planning Commission would be the applicant on behalf of whoever? Just a thought. The PowerPoint that you're using here, is that going to be available? Well, it will be available, I'm assuming. You guys have been real good about that. Will it be available before noon tomorrow? Because I've got a meeting tomorrow, and I'd kind of like to have it.
If it's not posted, David, just send me an email and we'll get it to you.
Okay.
So.
But just to get a follow-up on the number of applications you might expect, I mean, you guys are handling bus grants right now. How many buses do you run through your shop in a year?
Through the DERA program?
Yes.
I'll let Mark.
Sure. So in terms of like the amount of funding that we get in order to replace, it's usually anywhere from like 8 to 12 buses that we can replace. And usually, well, in the last 2 years, we've allowed schools to apply for either replacing one bus or two buses in their application. And it's usually it comes out to be about a 4-to-1 shot. So usually we'll get about anywhere between 25 and 35 schools submit an application for either one or two buses.
Okay. With 12,000 buses in the state, this is probably for my student transportation folks over here. If it was, best case scenario was half of the money, the 20 million you could spend in 1 year, correct? At $50,000 a bus, that's 400 buses. Is there demand for 400 new buses in the state of Missouri? That's 3% of the total.
There's probably about 700 buses replaced each year in the state of Missouri.
So the demand would be there at that funding level, at 50%?
And some of it may be matching funds. Over half the school buses in the state are owned by political subdivision school districts, and their funds are short. So as the matching funds decrease, the applicants will increase.
But again, best case scenario, you can spend half of the VW money in the first year, which is 20 million, at $50,000 per bus. It doesn't matter what kind of bus you buy, 50 grand a bus. That's is my math right, 400 buses? And you're saying we replace twice that many a year, just normal? So it doesn't sound like you'd have to gin up demand too bad to.
Yeah, I don't think we'd have any trouble getting applicants for the school buses. I mean, as Mark said, we get probably 25 to 30 apply for the DERA funds every year, and it's only a fraction of the cost of a bus. And so if we up that percentage through the Volkswagen, which the trust allows, then I would assume we would get even more
And
applicants.
then you could use that DARA money for some of the other categories, right?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Mark. There's a web question from Jesse Rollins. Has there been any more discussion regarding requiring a percentage match on project applications?
I don't think we discussed it today. I think that's one issue we asked in Survey 1 is how should the cost share work? Should we give bonus points to people willing to provide more than the minimum? And should we ever require more than the minimum? We got some feedback in Survey 1, but we haven't made any decisions on that. I think it's pretty apparent that if we can get some cost share and some match from the applicants, then we can spread the money to even more projects. So it's certainly a consideration, but at the same time, if there's, rural communities or really small income communities, they may not have the money unless we reduce that cost share as much as possible for them. So we're trying to balance and weigh all of that, and at this point we haven't made any choices. I think Kira or someone above her will make those choices.
As Mark referenced in Survey 1, we did ask percentage of cost share. That presentation is online, and I think Darcy has a printed copy. Oh, you didn't bring that one? Okay. But I think the general consensus was most people responded they wanted some, I've heard the term skin in the game. So rather than give 100% of anything when we were able to, the trust doesn't allow that in every category. But there was, I think, an overwhelming response that there should be some match. So that's my recollection anyway.
I believe the way that the results worked for Survey 1 was nobody wanted, the majority of people didn't want us to require more cost share. However, the majority said that we should give preference to projects that were willing to provide cost share, so.
I have a question.
Yes.
I don't know if this is on or not. So last time you went a little bit over the timing, and so can you please clarify, and some people might be new to the process too, is this going to be part of the budget that's going to be debated this legislative session, and it goes through appropriations?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
So along with the work that you're doing, you're also turning that in with your budgets that are going through the state legislature?
That's correct. So as we've mentioned in past meetings, there are several different ways that we could distribute this money through the trust and through the consent decree. We decided it was best to be as transparent as possible, which meant going through the appropriations process. So this fiscal year, which we're in right now and ends June 30th, we did not have the final consent decree in time to put that into the budget. So we don't have appropriations for this money in this fiscal year. That shouldn't be an issue because by the time we get the plan through the public comment period and start accepting applications, the earliest we would be distributing funds would not be before July 1st anyway, which starts the next fiscal year. So we are going through the appropriations process, and in simple terms, what that means is we are saying to the legislature and our budget is we want the ability to hold on to this money and pass it through. So in order for us to touch that money, we have to go through the appropriations process. We are not getting $41 million, and we actually only asked for the 1/3 appropriations in the first year because that's all we can spend in the first year of the trust. So that will kind of slow down the passing through of funds anyway, since we only asked for the $13 million in the first fiscal year. So July 1st of 2018 to June 30th of 2019, we will have the ability to pass through $13 million. So once we get the appropriations done.
Right, okay.
That is a process, as many of you all know, and the budget process is ongoing. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have another comment from online. Catherine Werner says, if you require a match of our local government, we won't be able to participate. If the decision is to require a match, I strongly encourage you to either exempt local governments or permit in-kind match.
Thanks, Catherine. We appreciate that comment.
I'll second that.
Okay. And you received a second from the other end of the room, David Grimes. So.
I've got two comments. First comment is, if we're talking about some of the categories up there, I know we talked about this with the large trucks when we came to the ideas on how many numbers of those trucks are in the state of Missouri. Much of those were passed through. I also understand, just from personal experience with some of the trucking companies, is yes, they may be based in Missouri, so therefore they may be eligible for this money because they're based here. But I wonder if maybe when we're looking at the matrix on if, who's going to qualify and who's going to actually get the grant, is maybe we should have a question on there, and not just with the big trucks, but maybe across the board, or, in certain categories, that how often is that vehicle going to be used in the state of Missouri? If it's a truck, if it is a large truck, and I use that just because it's an easy one to pick on, is if that truck is going to be replaced, is it going to be a truck that's going to be replaced to use on Missouri roads, or is it a truck that is going to be replaced to be used in California most of the time? So therefore, we're not getting the benefit and reduction of NOx because that vehicle is not being used on our roadways. The second is with your question about whether we're going to be able to replace or use the money for school buses or what have you. I think your numbers, you mentioned replacing around 700 buses a year, and though that may be accurate, we also have to understand that a lot of those buses are being replaced by larger districts that can afford to replace. And I'm speaking from experience with our school district, is that education has been hit extremely hard with funding and mandates by the state or mandates by the federal government of things that we have to provide funding for or provide for children. And year after year after year, transportation takes a hit. Our school, we've replaced one bus within the last, I think, 6 years because we can't afford to put that money into transportation. Our oldest bus is a 1995 model. And if you know anything about transportation with school buses, they're used every single day and they're beat to death. And they have to be on the road for the children to get to and from school or to activities and back. And they have to be reliable. And so I know I'm from a school, so my words are, kind of skewed in that direction. But, also if we're looking for the impact of what's going to benefit our residents more, school buses is definitely a big one, and I think that it needs to be skewed more on a matrix side towards the districts that can't afford on their own to replace buses in the first place, or can't replace them on a schedule like some of the bigger school districts can. So I think, I'm kind of towards the matrix on that, and I understand at some point in that matrix there's going to be a whole bunch of them in a pile. They're probably going to be even, and you're probably going to have to come down to either a group, look through the applications, or pick them out of a hat. But I think that there should be some look at matrix or bonus points for certain areas and certain abilities, if that makes sense.
I have a question back to you, and I think this would be a common sense answer, but I want to make sure I'm thinking about this right. As we saw on the slide of at least our data on school buses, is there are quite a few older buses, and you referenced yours, 1995. So if the matrix or if the methodology on choosing a school bus was skewed more heavily towards older buses, I would assume that would get the school districts that didn't have the money to replace them, because they're going to be the school districts with the older buses. Am I drawing the line correctly there?
That would probably be a good estimate.
Okay.
I'm not saying that's going to be foolproof, but
Right,
it would
right.
definitely give you a good gauge.
Okay. We were looking at our data that we have, and granted, it doesn't seem like it's complete, but there were quite a few buses older than 2004 and 88s and 90 buses. There were quite a few of those. I would assume, since they were inspected, that those buses are on the road, and that concerns me as that those older buses are still on the road.
Yes, there are a lot of those older buses still on the road. And take, for instance, our fleet in particular, it is an aged fleet, and we have to maintain buses that are there readily available to put on the road in case one does break down. And because it is an older fleet, then we're having to rely on those older buses that are sitting back as reserves much more often just to be able to make the fleet reliable.
I had one question for you. Since you say you struggle, have you tried to participate in any of the deer, or is the cost share preventive there?
I would have to say that as far as me personally, I am kind of new as far as the management side goes. I know I spoke, within the last 6-7 years, and that's because I've participated in school transportation that long, not necessarily because I've been in management. So I don't know that I could accurately answer that question.
Well, let me ask it in a different way. This is where I really wanted to get at is for a school like yours, that kind of struggles with transportation budget. What is that point where if a grant were offered to cover a certain percentage of a new bus that you jump on board and say we're interested?
I would say that most of the schools in my situation that 25% would be it'd be harder to swallow. If you get up near 50%, then you would start getting many more applications. But I'd say below 50%, you're probably going to have some that just are going to flat out say, well, we can't even provide 50% at this point, or maybe not more than maybe one bus or something like that at that point, which is kind of why I was one of those that answered that it needs to be in multiple steps, because one school, our school in general, we wouldn't, if it was a match, almost at any percent, we wouldn't be able to jump on and replace a substantial number of our fleet because the cost share of multiple buses is so high. But if we're able to spread it out over multiple years, then it makes it much more attractive.
Thanks, that's very helpful.
I just have one more comment. So I would just echo some of the comments that have been made about EV charging stations. There were several survey questions that you had a majority or a substantial amount of people saying that the fund should be statewide. And I think EV charging stations along highway corridors is a very good way of doing that. So.
Just one other vehicle that just hasn't been brought up in this meeting that I wanted to just keep in mind, but it's been brought up in prior public input meetings, and that's trash trucks. So I just wanted to mention that. I'm not saying we should have some sort of, you can't have some special category for trash trucks, but that would fall into the medium-duty truck and category. And as far as scoring, that category goes, I just think that's one worth keeping in mind because they do operate, they don't operate in the efficient part of a diesel engine on a generally. They're accelerating, decelerating, accelerating, decelerating. Often, the concentration of those is in urban areas, of course. So I think that might be one to give some, consider as you develop the scoring in medium-duty trucks. And there are some alternative fuel solutions for those trucks as well. So I just wanted to kind of remind the group to maybe keep that one in mind.
I'll second that one, too.
Well, this is all good discussion, conversation. I don't want to cut anyone short, but it looks, as I'm looking around the room, everyone's kind of probably done. Does anyone on the phone have another comment or question? Again, I would encourage you to submit any additional comments or questions you have on our website, on the comment portal that is still there. So if you have any questions, you can also call the number or email any of us here in this room that work for the AIR program. So, all right, well, stay tuned, watch your listserv. Oh, I see a hand.
I do have a question about the timing. It's talked about we'll likely have one more meeting and be able to review or comment on the plan that you draft.
Yes.
And where does the matrix fit into that? Would those be developed later or before? And will we have an opportunity to weigh in on the matrix?
I do believe that's the intention, that the matrix, and Mark and others, correct me if I'm wrong here, but we don't have to have that as part of the beneficiary mitigation plan, that detail. So we can develop that later, and I would anticipate that we would develop that later just from a work resource standpoint. So, but yes, I think the work of the advisory committee is not done when we finish the draft beneficiary mitigation plan. We will still utilize the listserv, ask for comments, and we may, and based on some of the survey questions, that we may need to bring a group of you together to help us develop the matrix or develop an application for a certain area. I think our area of expertise is limited in some things, especially the electric vehicle charging stations. So we would look beyond the AIR program for people to help us with those applications. So yes, there's still additional opportunity for help. So. And we'll be sending all information and updates through the listserv. So I assume everyone in this room is on the listserv. If you're not and have any questions on how to join that, please let us know. But we will be communicating our next steps through the Volkswagen listserv. So, okay, people are putting on their coats, closing their notebooks. Hopefully the weather's not going to be too bad for everyone to drive home. So.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all, appreciate it.
Thank you.